Hello, Facebook land. How are you tonight? Welcome to Wine Cellars Wine Wednesday. My name is Lee Slussinger, and I'm here with you tonight with Tortoise Creek, and we'll be talking to the founder of Tortoise Creek, Mr. Mel Master, and also his son, Charlie Master. It's a family affair. We'll meet some other families involved in the business along the way. Personally, I've been with Wine Cellars for 18 years, and I've known Mr. Mel Master for all 18 of them. His background in the industry is rather extensive, so without further ado, let's bring in Mr. Mel Master to talk about his background in the industry. Mel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy Tortoise Creek Day.
Happy Tortoise Creek Day.
So, as you can tell by the color of my hair, I've been in the wine business for a long time. Actually about 60 years, which means I probably started when I was minus 10. My family was in the business in the UK. So I was sort of weaned on it growing up. I met my amazing wife when I was 13 years old and she was 12. And we loved music and played music together, and we sort of grew up together. And then at 18 and 19, we got married, and we both realized we had this passion for food and wine. So the first year of our marriage, we went off to Europe, and we stayed in all the major wine producing regions, from the south of Spain, from sherry country to port country to Bordeaux to Burgundy to Germany to Champagne. And we sort of paid our way by singing in the cafes and playing guitar. Janie would take round the hat. She was very beautiful, so everyone used to give her lots of money, and so that paid for our sort of ability to survive and so on and so forth. And we developed, as I say, a passion for food and for wine and for living in Europe. And then we are back to England. Then we went to France in 1969, started our own little wine business. And the concept was to find and source little wines from the Rhone Valley and from other parts of France, and to sell them in the UK, but also America, because both she and I had an absolute passion about America. I think every young person in those days did, because it's where everything happened, and it certainly wasn't happening in England in those days. So we moved down to live in Aix-en-Provence, and was down there and in Provence. And we had, I co-authored a book called The Wines of the Rhone. And The Wines of the Rhone, we've tried to get it made into a motion picture with Brad Pitt as the sort of mayor of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere. So I'm trying to get it made into a musical now. I'm just kidding.
Hey, Mel, we've got some pictures. You want to show some pictures that we have?
Yeah, sure. Let's see the picture of, there's the book. There's Tortoise Creek.
We'll get there. Bear with me 1 second while we share. So there's our Tortoise Creek.
So that's my co-author, John Livingston Learmonth. And there with him is one of the greatest winemakers in the Rhone, Alain Auguste Clapp of Domaine Clapp in Cornas. And there he's looking at our first copy we've just come out with, The Wines of the Rhone. Yeah, those are magical days. And there's me weighing, I don't know, looks like about 300 pounds. And I'm being inducted into the Chansonnerie de Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And so the Rhone was really sort of a real passion for me and a love. But we then went on to Janie absolutely loved food and was an amazing chef, had been to the Cordon Bleu in Paris and in England. And we befriended one of the greatest chefs in the world, Paul Bocuse, in Lyon. And we went up there, Janie and I. Janie got a job working in the restaurant with Chef Paul, and he had, for no money, of course. I fell in love with the wines that he was making, all Beaujolais, And so I said to him, I said, how about we sell your wines in America with the Paul Bocuse label? You can come over, we'll travel around America. So he said, okay, we do this, but we have to introduce you to my friend Georges Duboeuf in the Beaujolais. So we went up and met Georges Duboeuf, and we started to do a lot of business and built up a very significant business in America for the Paul Bocuse Beaujolais coming from Georges Duboeuf. And then all of a sudden, 1973 comes along, and we have a really terrible recession, the Arab oil embargo. And so we're kind of forced to sell everything, pay off all our suppliers, and move our business to America. So we take all 3 baby children that we had, and who were like 1 year old, 3 years old, and 4 years old, and we went with a pin to the center of the country, Denver, moved to Denver, and set into the La Quinta Motel on I-25. And shortly after we were there, I met this guy, Tom Jordan, who was building a winery out in California called the Jordan Winery. So he said, you know what, come out and please help me launch the Jordan Winery and run it. But only on one condition, that is your wife, Janie, comes with you, because she's way more important, way more attractive than you. You'll notice in this picture how fabulous, you see the old flared trousers down there. So very fashionable. Those things will come back in fashion one day. Anyway, so that was Jordan Winery. It was the first great chateau, really, that was built in Bordeaux, in California. The weird thing was that the winemaker and I were allowed to use Tom Jordan's private Learjet to fly around the country to launch our wine. You can see how different the wine trade is today. Tortoise Creek does not have a private jet, not yet, anyway. So we then went from there to New York, and I opened a couple of restaurants out there. Jams, which was a very, very successful restaurant in the 80s. My partner was a guy called Jonathan Waxman. Some of you may have heard of him. He's always on the TV show, network shows, and we had a lot of time doing that. And then after 5, we had a Jams in London, all this sort of stuff. But then finally we decided, you know what, our hearts are in the wine business. We need to move back to France. So we moved back to France, me and Janie, and that is Janie. And let me just, at this point, can I just introduce my tiger? What? This is my girl, Janie. I want you all to meet her.
My hair has,
this is Janie.
My hair has changed color slightly.
So this is my Janie, who is my partner, and I and Charlie have really been partners from the beginning, and we started the Tortoise Creek project. So I just wanted to meet Janie for a minute.
We've been married 56 years.
Last week. Yeah.
And the secret is, you tell them.
You're always right. Always works.
Salut.
So so when we moved back to France, there's one point at which now I just want to mention that if we go back to the time when I was in Denver, there was a person who entered my life who was to be absolutely key, not only to my own personal life, but our business life. This was a young guy called Yale Sager who just started up a company in Chicago called Wine Cellars. And he came to Denver, and we met, and we sort of got on like a house on fire. And I asked him if he would help me with my wines and sell our wines in his part of the world, and we became partners. This guy is Yale Sager, and this is him. As you see, he was delivering wines back then on the back of a motorbike, right, Yale?
He's not in there, but
and this is my buddy Yale with Georges Duboeuf and myself. Yale was the one who took over the Duboeuf business, which was very embryonic in those early days in the 70s and built it into an incredible brand in America. And today, I'm blessed and happy to say that he and his two boys are sons, are partners with me and with Charlie in our Tortoise Creek brands and our other wines. So how did Tortoise Creek begin?
Well,
So,
Mel, do we want to say hi to Yale real quick here?
yes.
Let's
Yale,
put
can
Yale
I say
into
hi
it.
to
And
you?
let's have a hi to Mr. Yale, my boss and your business partner.
Hello.
Hey, Yale.
Hello, everyone. Appreciate your abbreviated story, Mel.
Do we have any stories to tell, Yale?
Oh, me? I have lots of stories to tell. When
But I think a lot of the
yeah.
stories that we had in those days we can't really publish, right?
Well, some of them we can. You know, the first visit was in January of 1978, I think.
That's right.
You were still the sales manager of a small distributor, and this was before Jordan, way before.
Right. That's right.
You know, you had the Paul Bocuse wines and something in Gisselbrecht from Alsace,
Right.
and
That's
Rhone,
right.
the Caron from the Rhone.
That's
and
right.
I had a bunch of German wines, which you didn't have. So we decided to switch over, and we started from there. And then I said, well, why are we selling Bocuse and not selling the Dubuff name when Dubuff is making the wine?
Right.
So we started. I think six months later, we just started selling the Dubuff wines along with Bocuse. And that history we all know.
You kept me also on the straight and narrow. We didn't have any dividends. You wouldn't let us pay out any dividends for several years. But what we did do was every year we would go to France and we would stay 3 nights in a very nice hotel. And we'd eat in very nice restaurants. And that was our dividend.
Oh, yeah. We'd get off the plane at 8 o'clock in the morning, drive to Chablis and have a 2-star lunch, and then drive down into the Beaujolais and have a 3-star dinner. And the second day, I became a little bit green. You know,
That's right. We had to take you to the hospital.
Almost. There was a cigar too.
Yale has been not only one of my dearest and closest friends and Janie's, but also truly absolutely the most ideal business partner someone could have. He's loyal, honest, a lot of fun, likes food and wine, and best of all, he knows how to watch the bottom line, which I never did. So anyway, Tortoise Creek, that's what we're all here to talk about. So let me just bring that up for a minute.
Yeah, so I just want to take a moment here and see if anybody has any questions. Feel free to type it into the chat room. We're monitoring that, guys. So if there's any questions for Yale and Mel, let's keep it on the up and up. Type it in there. Otherwise, we'll thank Yale for appearing. We love seeing Yale from Arizona. Thanks for joining. Stay cool down there.
Oh, yeah.
And
Thank
stay
you.
safe. And
I'll stay through the duration if you need me.
Right on. Thanks, Yale.
Thanks, Yeli.
All right, Mel. So I think this takes us to maybe talking about the origins of Tortoise Creek, and I'll pull up a couple of PowerPoint images for us that'll help illustrate your story. So go ahead and get us started with the kind of the origin of the concept.
Well, you know, back in the 90s, all French wine that was being sold in America was predominantly varietally driven. All the American wines that were being sold in America were all varietally driven. In France, it was more the appellation that was being sold. So we had made a decision, Janie and I and Charlie, to maybe look for single varietals coming out of France and selling those in America. And Janie and I lived in this beautiful, idyllic little home in Provence. And our idea was to make a winery down there. And after we had all these beautiful vines and a place to make wine, and after about 3 weeks of trying to prune the vines, Janie and I both felt that we were going to need to have back transplants. So we decided, no, let's go to something different. So we looked for sourcing really great wines from different parts of the Languedoc. And so Tortoise Creek, that picture before was of the original creek that you saw. And that's where we used to go down and feed the little tortoises, hectoliter and milliliter and centiliter. Janie would go and feed them little scraps of food and leftovers. And that was so we decided to call the brand Tortoise Creek. And our brand was actually, our home is called Le Riseau de Tortue, which was the same thing. So this was the first label in the critter days. And we have, as you can see, there's hectoliter on the right, and he's rather a lecherous looking guy. And then there's this milliliter on the left. And then down the bottom, this is later edition when Charlie became involved. So this is milliliter. So Charlie is milliliter. So that was a fun thing. And it worked for a while. But then we had this we used to source our wines we'd go out to all these little restaurants, and Janie would meet up with the chefs, and afterwards we'd have these fantastic little country wines, and we'd ask the chef, Janie would go and ask the chef, where do you get this fantastic wine? And we make a relationship with them, and we start to work with them and tell them that we would love to buy their wines and put it under the Tortoise Creek label. So that's really how Tortoise Creek began. And it became a really successful entity. But it was only in 1998 that actually it was a little later than that. It was a little about 2002 that we decided that rather than having this as a French brand, that we would make it into a Californian brand. It made more sense with the name. So I talked to my buddy Yale Sager, and we looked for sourcing in California, and we found some amazing people to work with, both in the south and the north, all over the region. And we put together what we felt was some of the most exciting, best valued, most atypical wines that we could find from California. A big emphasis on sustainability. We wanted nearly all of our wines to be sustainably farmed. And today, half of them, 3/4 of them are all certified sustainable, and the others are sustainable, but they have become really just great wines. So with no further ado, I think maybe now we should talk about the wines. Lee?
Well, what I'd like to do is maybe let people out there go ahead and enjoy any white Tortoise Creek. We're specifically tasting the Chardonnay, the Pinot Noir, and the Zinfandel today, and we're going to pull in Charlie to talk about that. So we're about 18 minutes into the broadcast, so we want to make sure that people don't have empty cups. So go ahead and fill your glass, and maybe you can talk about, we can introduce Charlie, and then we can transition into tasting the three wines.
Good idea.
So I got a couple images here that might be kind of fun to embarrass Charlie with before he's on the line. And pardon my lack of ability to properly. Here we go. There's the young sommelier.
Go back. That was okay. So Janie and I took that picture of Charlie.
6 months.
Go back.
There.
That was a picture of Charlie. Go back.
Sorry.
Please. That was Charlie when he was 6 months, not even 5 months old. There's a magnum of Romani Conti, 1959. There's a magnum of Chateau Margaux, 1929, and a couple of little lesser wines on the left. So he was sort of, weaned on wine. And then you look at there's Charlie. Charlie, you should talk about this, man, not me.
All right, let me pull Charlie into the broadcast here while he's waiting backstage. Let's say hi to Mr. Charlie Master. Hey, Charlie, how you doing tonight?
Very good. Happy Tortoise Creek, everybody.
Happy Tortoise Creek.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Hello, Dad.
Hello.
Lou. And thank you, Yale, for watching us all.
Okay.
and being there for us. This is me when I was a very young lad. So that is me actually tasting Dad's.
Yeah.
I believe that's Beaujolais Nouveau. You can tell by the color of the leaves of those vines in our vines. That's actually in Provence. I believe I was about almost 3 years old then.
Yeah,
So
you were 3.
Yeah, so 1972, 1973. And I'm drinking out of a Tastavin. And if you could see closely, that's the sample bottle is sitting on the actual ground there. I'm just making sure that that's a good vintage. So it's probably October, I'm guessing, or no, September, because the leaves changing colors. A very good dungarees, very nice, a very smart outfit that I had back in those days. And on the bottom there is my father and I in the Vin Expo, which back in those days in the 80s and early 90s was the most powerful wine, kind of the Olympics of wine. And it was done in France, in Bordeaux. Now it's a Provence, which is in Germany. But this was a booth that my father and I had for a wine that he created with my mother before we did Tortoise Creek, called Les Jamel, which comes from the name Janie and Mel. And Les Jamel, that's Dad and I holding the bottles. And those are bottles, I believe we're holding the Marsanne and the Merlot in our hands there. And those were two of my dad and I's favorite wines. This was before the movie Sideways that ruined the poor grape Merlot. But, these are some of the same farmers that we're using today. And then on the top there, you see me and my dad. I was just about to go to work at Chateau Prairie-Lachine. Alexis Lachine was a gentleman that knew my father because he wrote a book around the same time as my father wrote a book about the wines of France. His was called the Encyclopedia of Wine. And my dad and I were at lunch in New York City back when my dad had a restaurant with Jonathan Waxman. And I was trying to plan the rest of my life. And we're sitting at this wonderful lunch. And my dad noticed this guy out of the corner of his eye. And he kind of stood up, and next thing you know, Alexis Lachine was sitting in the table next to us with his son, Sacha Lachine, who now owns Whispering Angel and Chateau Escalon. And, he said to my dad, they gave each other their hugs, and I said hello to Sacha, and he said, Alexis said to my dad, well, when your son's ready, send him over to Chateau Prairie-Lachine, and I'll give him a good day's work. So, within about a year of that, when I was in my late 16th year, I went to France, and my dad dropped me off with this amazing winemaker family, and that's basically was my college. I went to Chateau Prairie-Lachine and worked for Alexis for 2 years before he tragically passed away of cancer, and I was one of the pallbearers in the funeral, and they ripped up some of the most important vines at Chateau Prairie-Lachine that were close to the railroad tracks and the high slopes of Pauillac, and that's where he is today. And then I followed my career, and that's basically the relationship that I started when I really passionately got into the wine business, and I had no idea. After all the books that I read, I was very, very intimidated because there was so much to learn. And I very vividly remember coming back to America in 1990, about 3 years later, and my mother expecting to see this very smart, very confident young lad who knew lots about wine. I remember looking at my mom, and my mom says, so why are you stressed? I'm like, Mom, I've been studying wine for 3-4 years. I've read all these books, and I still feel like there's so much more to learn. And she looks at me with a big smile, and she's like, Charles, wine is very much like women. You can study it all your life, and you're never going to figure it out. But if you get enough of it, it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside. So all of a sudden, the wine business became this magical thing to me. Instead of being right or wrong, there was a lot of beautiful and artistic things in this business. And there is a right or wrong. There is wines that are corked or materized, but in general, it's a very personal thing. Wine is such a wonderful art form that enables all of us to enjoy our meals better.
It's very good.
Very good, Charlie.
So I'm tasting the Chardonnay now.
Yeah, let's get into the Chardonnay. And before we do that, Mel, do you want to stick around and talk about the wines, or you want Charlie and I to
I like Charlie to do it because he's really one-on-one with this, and I'm here, so I'll shout out if there's something I want to add. But I think he's got it.
Yeah, type in. We're monitoring the chat room again, and welcome to the Tortoise Creek Wine Wednesday here with Wine Cellars. And before you disappear, Mel, we'll pull you back in at the end, but I just want to give you a little cheers here.
Cheers.
Mel, you got a glass? No more glass, Mel?
To the dads.
To the dads.
To the dads. Yale, Mel. We couldn't have done it without you guys.
Cheers.
Thanks. We'll see you. We'll see you towards the end in case there are any questions for you, Mel.
Okay, buddy.
All right. We'll see you in a little bit.
So this is the Jams blend, people. All right. So this is the Tortoise Creek Chardonnay Jams blend. The name of the cuvee is in reference to Janie and Melvin. So when we actually had Jams, which is the name of Mom and Dad's restaurant with Jonathan Waxman in New York City back in the 80s, there was, the top selling wine that we served at Jams was Chablis. And I remember vividly Dad saying that he really wanted to do a wine that his Chablis drinking friends would enjoy without having it too overwhelming. And so the concept behind the Tortoise Creek Jams blend was to make a wine that wasn't overly extracted with too much sugar and too much alcohol. We wanted it to be very delicate and elegant, so it complements food, being that Mom's a chef. And also the fact that I think sometimes oak can get in the way and can distract from the wonderful quality of the grapes. And this particular area, Lodi, where this wine comes from, it's a warm climate. And a lot of people think that Lodi is very, very hot. Well, it's actually got a very similar seasonal temperature as Sonoma. So it's got these wonderful colder mornings where you have this, mist that comes in from the deltas that come in from the ocean, because this is really just about an hour inland from San Francisco.
Let's show them the map, and we'll come back to the map occasionally to talk about some of the locations for the other wines. The Zinfandel also comes from Lodi, so keep that in mind when we talk. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Pinot Noir location when we get there too. So I'm going to pull up that map of California here, and we'll hopefully be able to point out California. So we see California there. So if you can see Sacramento there about 2/3 of the way up, the capital of California. Lodi is that kind of orange splotch that's a little bit lower to the right of Sacramento. So while it's actually what we consider Central Valley, you see those rivers, and those rivers feed into the bay in San Francisco. That's actually lower altitude, and the Pacific does work its way in through those channels and affects the growing climate in Lodi. So when we think of the Central Valley there, which is kind of those orange striped looking areas, that's that big Central Valley. We just think of it being blazingly hot and making tomatoes and producing jug wine. Lodi, with a slightly cooler area, actually produces some great fine wine. So, Charlie?
Well, so this does have minimal oak contact. I saw a question there, how long in oak? Volcar, it's minimal. So depending on the vintage, this only, I think, has about 1.5 to 2.5 months. And we use neutral oak, so it's not too overpowering. But one thing that we do to make this wine have, a taste of being very rich and creamy is we leave the wine on its lees. So the dead yeast actually in the tank, once the sugar eats the yeast dies and it falls to the bottom. And we leave that in the tanks, and we stir the tanks up 2 to 3 to 4 times a day. And that mixing up of the lee actually gives this wine this viscosity and this richness. And so you have this perception that this wine's been aged for quite some time in oak, but it's only a very little minimal oak contact. It's got a wonderful, for me, dried peaches. It's very pretty. You almost smell a little bit of cinnamon or vanilla in this wine, and that actually comes from the oak. But the white peach, the pear, you have a little bit of a green apple, but it's not too much green apple that you would normally find in some of these crisp, clean, drier styles of Chardonnay.
Yeah, for me, Charlie, I even get a little tropical note, typical for pretty ripe Chardonnay, which is that kind of grilled pineapple kind of flavor, some tropical fruit there. But for me, a very fresh and fruit-forward style of Chardonnay, certainly not those heavy oak bombs that most people associate to California.
Which is great. I love that the fact that the wines that we're making are actually much more a style that actually complements. I mean, the grape really is a vessel to show off the terroir, and the terroir, or the soil that the grapes are grown out of. A lot of these are these blocked off deltas from back in the 1800s, and so you have lots of the sediment and minerals that have come down and landed in the bottom of those riverbeds. You know,
yeah, a lot of alluvial soils.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you've got a wonderful amount of wonderful minerals in the soil. And of course, as winemakers know, the more stress that the grapevine's under, the more strong the grape. It's just like us humans. The more stress that we go over in our lives, the stronger we become. And so this area is great for that, because you have some, winters where it's very cold and it rains a huge amount and there's floods. And then you might have a 10-year period where there's a drought and the plant gets really stressed out and not enough water. And so all of that plays into effect to make these vines more powerful and strong.
Cool. Does anybody have any questions on this Chardonnay, the Tortoise Creek Chardonnay? Nice fresh style. And I think Charlie talked about the general philosophy with the Tortoise Creek wines is obviously to get the best value for money that we can get, that we're looking for. We work with wineries and winemakers all through California. So a lot of the wines have different origin stories. The Pinot Noir is coming up, which is no exception. Our Tortoise Creek Pinot Noir. All these wines tend to get Best Buys. This particular vintage, 2018, and the Pinot Noir has an 87 Best Buy out of the Wine Enthusiast. And we see similar scores for these wines up and down the line, including the Cabernet, Merlot, and Sauvignon Blanc, which we won't be tasting tonight. But let's talk about a little Pinot Noir, and I can pull back up the map and we can talk about Clarksburg and the Central Coast.
And the name Mission Grove, which is the name of this cuvee, it actually refers to the mission olive trees. So when we first started making this wine, you have these old mission olive trees that are planted every 10 to 20 grapevines, planted by the old settlers back in the late 1800s. That these were old grapes. And I think one of the reasons I think this wine has this wonderful solidity to it is because you do have some of those roots touching the roots of the vines. But Mission Grove, the name of the vineyard, is actually in reference to the mission olive trees that are planted throughout these vineyards. And if you can see here on the map, there is two different regions where this wine comes from. It comes from Clarksburg and Monterey.
So Clarksburg is the next to Lodi, actually to the left of Lodi, directly below Sacramento. You see another just little orange, almost comma-looking area. It's a very small area, and it's even more influenced by that Pacific coming in. So it's tends to be even like 10 to 15, depending on where you are and what time of day, 10 to 15 degrees cooler than Lodi. So almost like a Carneros-like effect with the bay, affecting the growing region there in Clarksburg. So obviously really great for a cooler climate variety like Pinot Noir. And then the other portion coming from Monterey, or the Central Coast in general. So if you look down further south, almost directly below there, you'll see San Jose. And kind of that's the Central Coast, right through from the Santa Cruz Mountains there down into the Salinas Valley, which runs there. You can see the Santa Lucia Highlands, Arroyo Seco, and Monterey, which runs between two mountain ranges down there. Also very Pacific influence. So we're looking for these cooler climates that cooler because of those Pacific influences in order to source our Pinot Noir. Charlie?
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that these wines, I think for me, were the style of wines that my father wanted to create, that really, you can easily enjoy these wines with so many different types of food. So we wanted to have a wine that's not only financially accessible to the consumer, we wanted to have something that was complementary to food. But even if you're not eating food, we wanted these wines to be something that we're going to please. And so we really wanted to have a lot of quality for price. And that was a really big part of the concept behind Tortoise Creek. And I think that when you have a wine that's a single varietal, a lot of cases, people add other grapes into their Pinot Noir to give it a little bit of oomph. Well, we have such an amazing partner and farmer that makes this wine for us. We don't need any other grapes. He works so well with the soil that the actual vehicle that shows off the soil, which is the grape itself, which we've turned into wine, as amazing example of how wonderfully elegant this grape can be without any manipulation. So you don't have to add a bunch of residual sugar or sulfur or oak or anything, or Syrah for that matter, or Petit Syrah to make a great Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir should be, lighter in color. It should be, we actually particularly harvest these grapes at night, so it's cold. There's a maceration period, so the grapes actually get to hang out and, get to know each other a bit before they slowly start the fermentation. And they, we don't over oak this wine. It doesn't have too much oak, and the oak that it does has is a combination of European or French oak and American oak, mostly French oak. But I'm
I think it's good to note that there is a lot of Pinot Noir out there, and I think there was precedent set by a specific brand that I won't mention by name, but it starts with an M, and most people have seen it around. And the laws in California are such that, depending on where you are, but if it's just California appellated, it's only 75. It only needs to be 75% of that variety. Now, the American public doesn't really lean towards Pinot Noir as a flavor profile. It tends to be a little leaner, maybe a little more restrained, lots of acidity, and people are generally looking for these big fruity bombs. So this producer decided, hey, we have a lot of leeway to put a bunch of other stuff in our Pinot Noir and make it more appealing. Well, it has mass appeal, but it doesn't have the DNA anymore of Pinot Noir. And for example, if you go to Oregon, you go to the Willamette Valley, which may be kind of Mecca in the United States. Some places in California certainly will argue, but there the minimum allowed of Pinot Noir in your Pinot Noir is 95%. They don't want anything else in there because they know Pinot Noir does not play well with others. We're 100% Pinot Noir.
It is a very finicky grape, I think. The other thing I wanted to mention about the wines that we make, we do want to make wines that you can drink Monday through Friday. And then I think on certain occasions, they're also amazing during the weekends as well. But every day drinking wine, and to have that kind of price point for these kind of quality wines, I think is one of the things that we like to really be proud of. So hopefully you guys feel the same way about this wine. And that particular Pinot Noir has wonderful cherry notes, but also has this wonderful, almost a little bit of a cola smell, almost like a candy smell, but it's very, very light. I also smell raspberries, a little bit of the rhubarb in this wine.
Yeah, some pleasant herbaceousness, I think, a little bit, but that marks it for me. That tells me it's Pinot Noir. Lots of red fruit for sure, and the freshness is what's beautiful about this wine, I think. Again, that ability to pair with food and the ability to drink by itself, and I think we'll hopefully explore that a little bit with the Zinfandel that we get to next. Anybody have any comments out there in Facebook Live land about Pinot? We'll answer them as they come. Keith likes his good Pinot, so Keith, chime in as you wish. So let's move on to some Zinfandel.
Here we go, the Chelonian, people. This is where we get to give back to the tortoise community, okay? So you got this on the back of our label. We have a little logo back here. If you can see that logo, this is actually the logo for the Chelonian Society of America. And these people go around the planet Earth saving tortoises, terrapins, and sea turtles. Yes, folks, we're giving back to the tortoise community, being that we've used their name, Tortoise, for Tortoise Creek. This name, the Chelonian, is the name of this cuvee. It's also the Latin word for tortoises, terrapins, and sea turtles. But one thing we do, I noticed that Zinfandel can tend to be a very fruit-forward, very candy. You got a lot of, sweeter connotations to Zinfandel. It tends to be very high in alcohol. So ours has a couple special grapes in it. We've got about 5% Tannat. Now, Tannat is a very somewhat aggressive, masculine, thick-skinned grape. It's got lots of tannin and structure and acidity, which actually complements this, because that way, this Zinfandel, it also has Petit Syrah. So we actually have about 5% Petit Syrah, depending on the vintage, 5% Petit Syrah, 5% Tannat. In some cases, it might swap. It might get a little bit more Tannat than that. But that Tannat and that Petit Syrah really give this wine this wonderful structure and complexity, and makes it a little bit more balanced.
Yeah, certainly the Tannat, as a very thick-skinned grape, brings some tannin into the mix, some color, and the Petit Syrah brings some dark fruit in there to go along with some of that Zinfandel that we have. And that, for me, Zinfandel frequently on the affordable side is difficult to make. It has a tendency to ripen very unevenly, so you'll have a bunch at harvest that will have green berries, even along with overripe berries, along with properly ripe berries. So in order to actually produce a wine that doesn't have these underripe flavors or overripe flavors, you have to do incredible amounts of sorting and lots of work in the vineyard. So really kind of balanced Zinfandel that doesn't have those jammy overripe and green underripe flavors is difficult to make at that affordable price point. And here, what we're finding is I don't get a lot of those underripe or overripe characters, and the Tannat and the Petit Syrah are used to kind of just add some complexity and some balance back to our more red fruited, I think, more balanced, less ripe Zinfandel.
And this wine does have some really interesting nose to me. Like it has a little bit of the sassafras that you would smell in root beer, but it also smells to me like if you had a cassis. Those of you who know what cassis is, it's like black currant liqueur from Dijon in the north of France, and it's got this almost cassis infused hay. I mean, it's such a beautiful smell, but I always smell a little bit of watermelon in this wine as well. But very, very soft and smooth. It's not your typical, really big, heavy style Zinfandel. It's a little bit more balanced and a little bit better with food, for that matter, because of that.
Hey, Charlie, there's a question out there in Facebook land from Lucy, who's asking what the élevage, the oak treatment, might be on this wine.
So depending on the vintage, this sees about 6 months of French oak and some American oak as well.
And I'm guessing not a ton of it new. A little bit of spice, I think, which is typical from barrel as well as the variety. So it's integrated nicely into the wine. But there's definitely some oak and maybe a little bit more neutral oak, just really to soften the wine.
Exactly. And we actually do toast the heads of the barrels, so you have a little bit of toastiness on the oak. And what that does is it gives it almost like a little bit of caramelization. Once the wine is aging in the barrel, you get this almost caramel or almost like a brown sugar smell, and that comes from the burning of the oak before it's actually been aged with the wine.
A little char.
Yeah.
Yeah, a toast to the barrel.
Toasted head, yeah.
Toasted barrels. So does anybody out there have any other questions here? We're running at about 43 minutes, which is, here's Holly. One of our friends, Holly, from Wisconsin, and asking our favorite recipes, favorite pairings with wines, Charlie.
I have so many, but for me, Zinfandel goes incredibly well with anything that has been touched by fire. And what I mean by that is grill. So during barbecue, I personally chill my Zinfandel down. So if you serve this wine cold, ice cold, it's like Kool-Aid. And it goes incredibly well with anything grilled. You could have hamburgers, grilled salmon, grilled steak, grilled chicken, all and go incredibly well because you get this kind of smokiness from this wine because of that kind of charred barrel, but also because of the kind of richness from the sugar that's in this grape. This is kind of a grape that has a lot of fruit, right? So this is about a 15-degree alcohol wine. So you definitely want to have something that's got some spice as well. So some Bobby Flay recipe would go really good with this wine.
It's my Zinfandel's my go-to barbecue wine, Charlie. So I'm right on board with you.
Love that.
And then I think that Pinot Noir is, for me, Pinot Noir is the most versatile red grape out there because it's medium-bodied, has a lot of good acidity, so it pairs up with so many different things. To try to delve into that is going down almost a rabbit hole, which it also goes well with.
Very, very true. Also, this is something you can have, being that we're all quarantined, with slippers and pajamas in a teacup at 10 o'clock in the morning This is one of those
Charlie,
smooth-
don't self-reveal too much on this. So, I'm sorry, I interrupted you there, buddy.
No problem.
And then Chardonnay is salads and poultry and vegetarian dishes, that kind of stuff, huh?
And of course, they all go really well with cheese, any sort of cheese and bread. I mean, I think that my mom, I remember vividly also when I got back from this trip in France that I told you about earlier, that, every great meal, my mom used to tell me, should have the Holy Trinity, which is wine, bread, and cheese. They're all fermented. Those are all things that help break down food in your stomach. And I think all of these wines go incredibly well with bread and cheese. You could have a meal out of just one bottle of this wine, the right type of cheese, the right person, and the right type of bread.
That sounds like a good combination, Charlie. Speaking of combinations, we want to pull some other folks in here and say hi to the Mel and Yale one last time before doing our fondue.
Yes, definitely. Hopefully we did them well.
Let's see what.
You were terrific.
You guys got big shoes to fill, so we're trying.
Yale's are huge shoes. One thing I just want to say to you is that I think you alluded to this, Charlie, but I think one of the most attractive qualities of Tortoise Creek as a wine brand, as a wine line, is they tend to be quite European in style. Obviously not so much with the Zinfandel, but they tend to be very elegant, not too heavy, not overdone. They're not too sweet. They're very balanced. And I think
Just like me.
just like Janie, she's actually, in fact, I'm going to put her much more in the picture than me. So, yeah.
I agree. I mean, these wines are for everyday drinking, and that's why we make them, because we want people to be happy.
And they're priced that way too, guys. I mean, we're talking about $12 or so for retail price point on these wines that deliver what they promise, which is varietally correct, well-made wines at an affordable price point. So,
which make your tummy feel good when you're eating and when you're relaxing and when you have problems. Wine is a marvelously good thing for your body because it is natural and real and sustainable, and there's nothing better than being able to have wine, at times of your life.
Right.
Exactly. When you're in a little bit of yes, like we are at the moment.
Yeah.
In a little bit of you'd have a glass of wine and it's going to do you good rather than anything else.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, Yale and Mel, I want to thank you very much for having the sons that you had that are involved in these wines. And I miss Adam and Jordan. I can't wait to see them again. I can't wait to, not virtually hug you, physically hug you guys.
It's going to have to be virtual for a while.
I know.
One last statement. I've always said in our business, in the wine business and in life, that the most important thing of all is relationships. And I don't think, Charlie, you'd agree, I don't think we could ever have a more wonderful relationship than the one we do with the Sager family of wine cellars.
Yeah, thanks for putting up with me, guys.
Yeah, Yale, you put up with me for 40 years, buddy. So, it's time we get a divorce. That's it. Well, I'm done.
You're out of the will. You're in.
Well, guys, we're coming up on 2 minutes. I'd love to have a toast with everybody out there, you guys in Facebook land. If you have a glass, let's raise it together and thank everybody. This is about as good as we can do. We know wine is a social beverage, and this is what we're doing to try to stay connected. So come back and join us again. We'll be back tomorrow night, actually, with some German wines, and we have a full schedule that is every Wine Wednesday and every Wine Weekend, which will be Saturday with our different producers. We'll see Charlie and Mel again to do some of their other wines, the Tiamo range, as well as Les Charmel. So keep an eye out. See us in Facebook. Join our Facebook group and keep track of us. And we'd love to see you again virtually. And we look forward to drinking and hugging you physically soon.
Thank you, Facebook land.
Bon appetit.
Thanks, everybody.
Happy Wednesday, yeah.
Soon.
See you guys.
Au
Ciao.
revoir. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao,
Love you guys.
Ta-ta.